Welcome to Esalen Live, where we chat with change agents and swim deep waters in an ongoing exploration of human potential. I'm your host, Christine Chen. During the pandemic, many of us had to look a little harder for inspiration and may have found it in a particular practice found at the intersection of nature, art, and ritual. On Esalen Live today, this is very cool. Schildkret. He's the founder of Morning Altars, and he's the author of the soon to be released Hello Goodbye 75 Rituals for Times of Loss, Celebration, and Change. Very, very appropriate for these days. Hi, Day. Say hello.
Hi there.
So great to have you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It is a rainy day here in Portland. We're finally in the gray zone.
Right. It's all of a sudden, it's fall. So tell us a little bit about altars, past and present, because it seems like, in my family, we always had altars, right? And then it seems like in the United States, it was a lesser practice mainstream wise. But during the pandemic, people found things that spoke to them that may have such a deep history. Could you share that perspective with us a little bit?
Sure. I mean, my culture, we've had altars for, I mean, documented, we've had altars for about 3,000 years. Probably much, much older than that before we became like a people. I come from the Jewish people, and so our altars were called mishkans, and that was one of our altars. So we have a way of really understanding what an altar is and why it's needed and the necessity of it, as a way of coming closer to ourselves and a way of coming closer to the divine. It's an interesting, if you'll let me, it's an interesting play on words. We have this word in Hebrew called, which basically means offering, but the root of the word is likrov, which basically means to come closer to.
Hmm.
And so altars are a way of coming closer. The word altar in English actually means to raise up, etymologically speaking. But I see that also as a way of, the things that we put on our altars are a way that we can move closer to or become more intimate with the divine, ourselves, our ancestry, the mysteries. And so that's my inspiration for altar making. I mean, my story is, the way I came into altar making was from grief. I started to make altars when my father died about 10 years ago, and I went through a major relationship breakup. And that was the way that I was able to come closer to my broken heart, was through actually making something with my hands and putting my prayers and my longing and my grief on that altar or on those altars, because I made one every day.
Yeah. That's a beautiful practice. My practice is yoga, and in the mudras and hand yoga, we talk about everything that you do with your hands and express with your hands comes from the heart. So it's very similar to what you were talking about. Hey, if you're watching us at home, this is Esalen Live. We're with Day Schildkret. He is the founder of Morning Altars. He is a maker of altars everywhere. He is an author of the soon to be released Hello Goodbye 75 Rituals for Times of Loss, Celebration, and Change, which is on pre order, by the way, right now. He's talking to us about altars. So if you have any questions about how to enact this practice at home for yourself or how to use it for healing and like Day with grief, please let us know in the comments. Ask him any questions, and if he's being helpful to you right now, please give him a little bit of love. So speaking of helpful, how can they be helpful to spiritual and healing in this time? It's just so weird right now and so
Yeah.
difficult. The things change all the time. So, what can we look forward to in altars to help us heal?
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting. When I make an altar, it's made of many different pieces. If you look at my work, it's very much a pattern. So it's, a repeating pattern of, let's say, shells or berries, or in that case, leaves. And there's the same pattern repeating itself over again. If you look closely, it's many pieces, but if you step back, it's one thing. And so that's how I like to see kind of the alchemy of making an altar, is that we get to take the different broken parts of ourselves and we get to put them on the altar. And when we look at that, when we actually turn towards it and even make meaning with it, it becomes whole. It becomes integral, which etymologically the word integrity actually means whole. So that's the beauty of this practice, is that we're working with brokenness, we're working with longing, we're working with feeling of not belonging, we're working with our grief, we're working at all the ways that this year has been incredibly painful. There's been so much loss. And when we can turn towards that and intentionally put that down and make meaning with it, we start to come back to wholeness. Wholeness is not about excluding one thing and including all the things, for instance, that we prefer. Wholeness is really about including it all, even the parts that feel uncomfortable, even the parts that feel broken or that we would rather not look at. But with ritual, and this practice of making altars is most definitely a ritual, we get to include all the parts that feel left out or displaced or unwelcome. And we can include them in a beauty making practice. And to me, one of the things we need more right now than ever before is more beauty and more meaning, for sure.
Let me ask you this,
Yeah,
Day. When I saw you there placing rocks, and then you have a whole group of people like we saw at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge. I think that was Baker Beach, right?
correct.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it
No?
wasn't Baker's Beach. It was a landing above. Yeah,
Okay, so very
yeah,
close to that. I know that view pretty
close.
well.
Yeah,
So when you lay those rocks and then you have a
yeah,
whole bunch of people, and based on what you just said about, we get to put our broken parts of ourselves or the things from our heart, we get to pour it
yeah.
into this piece of artwork. How do you choose what thing represents the thing that you feel, and then how do you manage that for a group like we saw in that beautiful photo? And I'll pull it up again.
Yeah, so that specific photo was a group of people who gathered together, um, wanting to work with death and dying and grief. And so there were a lot of elements when that group came together. The altar was incomplete, and we offered them, I believe in this one, it was stones, where they got to place a stone on the altar of as many as they wanted, but really of at least one person or thing um, that they are grieving, that they have lost and are grieving, that they want to remember. And
Mm.
so we stood around the altar, and each person had a chance to put down a stone and remember that person or thing. Here, you can tell I'm a word nerd, but if you look at the word remember, the word re means to do it again, and the word member is another way of saying wholeness. And so remember basically means we have forgotten. So we have to do it again. We have to bring this whole thing back together again, which, by the way, is also what the word artist means.
Mm,
The etymology of the word artist means to bring back together again. That's the purpose of art, is
mm.
to take the real purpose of art, is to take the broken and forgotten pieces and to bring them back together again into something whole and identifiable or redeemable. And so
It's
that's what happens when we grieve. We remember. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need a breath. Inhale. Exhale, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions for Day? Please float them into the chat. And if you love his work and love what he's saying, please send him a little love, a heart emoji, a thumbs up emoji, anything that helps support his offering into the world. I found it so profound what you were saying about how people were able to place a stone together, right? So the symbolism, is there symbolism in what you choose correlating to your emotion? And then the process of placing, just for me, just feels so energetically like perfect in this offering way. Can
Yeah.
you describe, I love this one, and I'll put this one up because I found this photo of one of your altars with the blue robin's egg, and that's particularly significant in my life for a lot of reasons. But can specific objects help people if they pick the right thing, like crystals or something like that?
So the practice of morning altars is very much about land connection. It's not so much about I mean, sometimes people bring things that are, you know, bought or from other places, but really one of the things I teach, especially right now, I'm doing a teacher training with about 100 teachers from around the world. And one of the things I teach them is very much about connecting to the place itself and wandering about the place and allowing the place to invite you in and to approach her with a sense of wonder. And so this is very much about foraging in the area and seeing what grows there, what died there. And so it's a really, you know, there's a 7 steps to this practice. And the first step is very much about wandering and wondering,
Mm,
and opening our eyes and seeing as if it was the first time we ever saw that. Because we've become rather blasé in our modern life. You know, we see a tree or we see a bush or we even see our family or our partners and we get used to them and we stop really seeing them. So the magic of this practice is to see life again through a sense of radical amazement.
mm,
Um, and with regard to placement, you know, the other part of this practice is deep imagination and creativity. And I never ever determine patterns or designs beforehand. This is simply just about starting in the center and letting the pattern ripple out and really allowing the material to inform me where it wants to go and what it wants to be. And so, you know, in a way, it's very much about listening deeply. It's very meditative, um, and it's very much about finding meaning as it's happening. It's not premeditated or predetermined. And so in that way, you know, I've made over 1,000 altars in my life, and each one has become a teacher to me. Even though I've made it, I find information, wisdom, discovery as I'm making it. I find also my edges as I'm making it. I have a lot of, you know, negative talk that might come up, and I get to face that. You know, doing anything creative, you get to face your edges. And one of the things I love about that is that I get to include that into the process too and grow from those places.
mm.
And it is really, you know, making altars has become truly a teacher to me. And I'd say the biggest teacher is the fact that they're all impermanent. And so not one of the 1,000 that I've made remains.
Mm.
Sure, they remain in a photograph, but they don't remain. They all have returned back. And that's the biggest teacher of all.
Melissa sends you a little love, by the way, Melissa. We see you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Melissa.
much. Yeah. And send him a little love if what he's saying is so healing for you. It is for me, just listening to you talk about the dissolving of altars. Also, this practice of letting go is such a
Yeah.
teacher, isn't it? And that's what I was about to ask you is um, you've watched these altars go into place and they look so beautiful and perfect and all the things come out and then you have to like let it go. And what does that moment feel like in terms of our healing and and having this as a practice for our healing?
Well, I'd say, you know, I think oftentimes in, you know, kind of spiritual spaces, we have this thing called letting go and this, you know, this advice or this wisdom or guidance. And, but when you really value something, it's very, very hard to do that in the moment. It's hard to find the meaning when you don't want to let it go. So here's a little story. Those of you that know me have heard this story before, but a few summers ago, I was invited to make art for 2 weeks on at the home of Andy Warhol in Long Island. This big mansion, this mile-long beach. The only prerequisite to being the artist in residence there was that I would have to make an altar for their board and the press on the last day. And so I spent the entire time wandering and being inspired and making many altars. And the day before they were to come, I collected gorgeous lobster claws and crab shells and mussel shells and seaweed. And they arrived. Sorry, and woke up at dawn the day that they were to arrive, and I spent 7 hours on my hands and knees making, I'd say, one of the most exquisite pieces I've made, and I've made many. incredible specific geometry, really detailed, a lot of heart in that piece. And about an hour before they came, I was going to go wash up and take a photograph of it. And as I got up, the tide came and just completely took it away.
Mm,
The altar, all of the material I collected, there was nothing remaining. And you'd think maybe after doing this for so long that I would be much more, relaxed or at peace with that. But I cursed like a sailor. And I got angry, and I was screaming at the ocean. But it also immediately brought me into a humble place because I was in the presence of something much bigger than me. And so when the press and the board came to see the art that I had, I only had a story for them. And that story is actually, I'm telling that story right now because it's quite valuable. Because even though I wanted it to remain and to show them the amazing work that I'm capable of, I'm making this altar in a place that's much bigger than me.
mm,
And so I get to face my own preferences of how I want things to be and to contend with that. And so it's a humbling practice too, because while mostly I make altars and they disintegrate or dissolve or blow away at the quote unquote right time,
mm,
that one didn't. And so I have to often contend with impermanence. And sometimes impermanence happens when we can expect it. And oftentimes it's when it's least expected and least wanted.
yeah.
And that's the real practice, is to continue to relate to change. And this new book that you were talking about, rituals for times of loss, celebration, and change. I mean, that's the piece that's the most interesting to me, is that when life changes, and there's a chapter in this book called Rituals for Times of Crisis. And the question is, when times change and you lose your job, or someone dies, or you have to move out of your home and you don't want to, how are you approaching that? How are you responding to that change? And for me, my advocacy to this audience and to all of my audience is to approach it with meaning and to not resist it, but to make meaning with change.
It is definitely a place where a lot of us practice and come to the practice when there is actual change that has been put upon us, and then the thing comes up and we're like, oh, I have to really work with that. I want to share with you. Melissa says, thank you so much for sharing this. We lost our home in the Woolsey fire along with my neighbors. I want to do this with them, a great way of healing and helping bring us together again. That is beautiful. Thank you so much for
Thank you
sharing
so
that.
much for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we also have, let me put up what Lori said here. Lori said, great message in your story. I'm sure it had to resonate with the board and the press, with anybody really, where something gets swept away that you spent a lot of time doing or maybe got attached to, right? And then Charles says, loss of a spouse or partner is really hard. Yeah. And these are
Yeah.
just some of the ways that Day is offering through ritual, through altars, and his beautiful work to show you that nature has a lot of things that are inspirational in it to create some beauty from maybe this potential place of pain. I want to ask you, Day, as we're only a few minutes left here, um, with your work at Esalen in particular, because nature is such a huge part of just being there and the healing, how can we draw from the earth here, these pieces that we offer into this ritual and this gathering and this altar? And you mentioned that they go away, but how do we do that in a way that doesn't deplete the earth, but we respect it? Like, how does that relationship play?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say I'm not from that land, so I don't exactly know the spirit of that place yet. However, what I teach about is not engaging with the earth as a object, but engaging as a subject. And that is a complete shift in approach. So, for instance, even foraging, is not I mean, and I teach about this, so there's a lot of learning that happens in this space. But even foraging, we can engage in foraging like, I need this, I need that, I'm going to take. But what I'm doing in my workshops is really asking you to consider if the place is alive, and if it's a relationship, what does that look like? How do you take differently? And so, for example, one of the things that I teach about, and we'll teach about at this workshop coming up, is to ask permission. And that's a very interesting and odd thing for a modern person. What does it mean to ask permission from a place? What does it mean to ask permission, for instance, from a tree? That immediately puts us into a conversation about consent. And that is one way to kind of interrupt our consumer-based mindset that says, I want, I'm going to take because it's mine. I see it, it's mine. And it immediately puts us into a practice of relating. And practicing being in relationship with nature is a really excellent teacher to practice being in a relationship with other humans, especially partners and children, our bosses, even ourselves. And so, I really, really will spend quite a bit of time practicing stepping out of our mindset that says it's there for me. And I've had many experiences where I've come across beautiful flowers, and I have asked permission and I've gotten the word no. I've gotten the no, you may not. And that helps me remember that as a human, I don't sit at the top of the pyramid. It's not all there for me. Everything that is growing is alive and has its own autonomy. And so, the word that comes to mind is a courtship. It's a courtship with place. And it requires a certain kind of gifting mentality, which Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book Braiding Sweetgrass speaks beautifully of this teaching of reciprocity in relationship with the earth, giving and taking, constantly giving and or giving and receiving, is a better way of saying it. And so that's very much at the heart of the Morning Altars practice as well.
Yeah, I would imagine honoring the moment as well, because each moment is that relationship is going to feel different in each moment and speak to you differently. I want to
Very
add
much.
this to the broadcast here. Christophe, wonderful. Glad I found this today. Thanks for joining us, Christophe. Let us know where you're joining from too. And this last question before we go, Melissa, who talked earlier about losing her house or her neighbors losing their houses in the fire recently, would you suggest debris from the fire or just the nature around as she plans to enact this practice with her neighbors to heal from this experience? What would you say to that? And Melissa, thanks for that question.
Thank you, Melissa. I mean, I would say, what's more important to you? I think the question is why? Why are you making an altar? And if you can locate your intention, either beforehand or even after, for instance, who's it dedicated to, it can inform you as to what kind of material you want to use. So I think if you're making an altar to honor the grief and loss of your home, it would make a lot of sense to incorporate the debris, because it's a part of your grief and it's very much representative of that. And so I would say, again, I'm not one to prescribe so much, but I would say that probably, if I was making an altar, that would probably sit at the center.
Yeah.
And my brokenheartedness oftentimes does.
Well, you will be able to experience this and learn from the experience with Day in an upcoming workshop at Esalen, October 29th through 31st. It's called Grief into Beauty, which is what we've been talking about today on Esalen Live, creating nature altars to transform and heal from this here. And we definitely need it. Thank you so much, Day. It's been such a pleasure to have you. Yeah. Everyone have a beautiful day. Create an altar where you are and heal. We'll see you soon.